Life, my dear listeners, is often a stage where the smallest acts unravel the grandest truths. Today, I'll share a story, a gripping tale that begins with a seemingly mundane traffic stop, but unfolds into an epic battle of justice, integrity, and the power of standing tall for what's right. It's a story about Marcus Ellis, a man who faced a moment of reckoning with grace and turned the tide of prejudice into a wave of reform. As we journey through this narrative, you'll find yourself reflecting on themes of courage, empathy, and the power of speaking truth to power. If you feel inspired, I invite you to subscribe to this channel and leave a comment below, perhaps with a phrase like, "I stand for justice, integrity, and change for the better." Together, let's spread positivity and moral strength in these turbulent times. Now let's embark on this unforgettable journey. It was a cool, crisp autumn afternoon in Willow Creek, the kind that makes you want to take the scenic route just to enjoy the golden leaves fluttering gently in the breeze. Marcus Ellis, a composed and thoughtful man in his early 50s, was driving his dark blue sedan down County Road 21. He had just left a community meeting where local leaders had gathered to discuss ways to foster unity and address concerns about policing. Ironically, that very subject was about to become deeply personal. Deputy Daniel Hayes, a patrol officer with a reputation for being both meticulous and overzealous, was parked by the side of the road. His eyes scanned the passing vehicles with the intensity of a hawk searching for prey. Hayes was known to pull drivers over for the slightest infractions, and today was no exception. When Marcus's car passed by, Hayes decided the vehicle's left taillight appeared dim, a minor issue at best. The flash of red and blue lights in Marcus's rearview mirror signaled the beginning of an encounter neither man would ever forget. Marcus calmly pulled over, his demeanor unwavering as he adjusted his tie and prepared for what he assumed would be a routine exchange. Hayes approached the vehicle with a brisk, almost theatrical stride. "License and registration," Hayes demanded, his tone clipped and authoritative. Marcus complied, retrieving his documents with precision. "Certainly, officer. May I ask why I've been stopped?" Hayes didn't answer immediately. Instead, he scrutinized Marcus's license, his brow furrowing as if searching for something more than a simple answer. "Your taillight is out," he finally said, though there was an edge of suspicion in his voice that made the statement feel more accusatory than informative. "I see," Marcus replied, his voice steady. "Thank you for pointing that out. I'll have it checked right away." It should have been the end of the exchange. A citation, a friendly reminder perhaps, and Marcus would be on his way. But Hayes wasn't done. There was something about Marcus, his composed manner, his crisp suit, his unwavering calm, that seemed to unsettle the deputy. "Where are you headed?" Hayes asked, his tone now probing. Marcus tilted his head slightly, his gaze meeting Hayes's. "I don't see how that's relevant to a traffic stop," he said evenly, the faintest hint of a challenge in his voice. This response only fueled Hayes's unease. In his mind, Marcus's refusal to answer a simple question became a sign of defiance. "Step out of the car," Hayes ordered, his hand resting on his holstered weapon. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. Marcus exhaled slowly, his mind racing through the possibilities. He had seen and heard of situations like this before, moments when a simple encounter spiraled out of control. But he also understood the importance of composure, of not letting fear dictate his actions. "Of course," Marcus said, his voice calm but firm. He opened the door and stepped out, standing tall under the autumn sun. His presence was commanding, not because he sought to intimidate, but because he carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man who knew his worth. Hayes, however, interpreted Marcus's poise as arrogance. The officer's suspicions deepened as he proceeded to question Marcus about his whereabouts, his work, even his reasons for traveling on that particular road. Each answer was met with further probing, as if Hayes were determined to find a crack in Marcus's story. The situation escalated when Hayes announced he would perform a pat-down. Marcus knew his rights and understood that Hayes was operating on nothing more than a hunch, a dangerous precedent in any interaction with authority. Yet, he also knew that resisting could lead to a confrontation neither of them wanted. "Do what you need to do, officer," Marcus said, his tone unflinching. As Hayes conducted the search, his frustration grew. He found nothing, no contraband, no weapons, nothing to justify his escalating behavior. And then, in a moment that would later be described as the turning point, Marcus looked Hayes directly in the eye and said, "Do you know who I am, officer?" The question was delivered not with arrogance, but with quiet conviction. Hayes faltered, his expression a mix of confusion and defiance. "No," he replied curtly. Marcus reached into his jacket pocket, slowly and deliberately, and produced a badge not one of law enforcement, but of authority nonetheless. "I'm Marcus Ellis, Director of Police Oversight for the state," he said, his voice steady and resolute. The effect was instantaneous. Hayes's bravado crumbled, replaced by a dawning realization that he had not just overstepped his bounds, but had done so in front of a man with the power to hold him accountable. Marcus's words hung in the air, their weight undeniable. This was no ordinary traffic stop. It was a moment of reckoning, not just for Hayes, but for the entire culture of unchecked authority that had allowed such behavior to persist. Marcus stood as a symbol of accountability, a reminder that no one is above the law, not even those sworn to uphold it. As Hayes stood there, visibly shaken, the gravity of the situation began to sink in. Marcus's calm demeanor had not only disarmed him, but it also exposed the very flaws in his approach to policing. It was a lesson that would echo far beyond the quiet stretch of County Road 21. What happens when the tables are turned, and the one seeking to impose control finds himself under scrutiny? In the next chapter, we'll explore Marcus's composed yet powerful confrontation with Hayes, delving into the ethical dilemmas and systemic issues that this encounter brought to light. Stay with us and let's uncover the deeper truths together. As Marcus stood there, the crisp autumn air brushing against his face, he knew this moment was about more than just a traffic stop. It was about principle, integrity, and the quiet courage it takes to confront injustice with dignity. Hayes, on the other hand, looked like a man who had just realized he was standing on thin ice. His composure cracked, revealing traces of uncertainty and frustration. But Marcus, ever the embodiment of restraint, didn't press the advantage. Instead, he allowed the silence to hang in the air, giving Hayes a moment to reflect on the gravity of his actions. "Mr. Ellis," Hayes finally stammered, his tone softened but laced with defensiveness. "I was only doing my job." Marcus raised an eyebrow, the slightest of movements that conveyed both skepticism and patience. "Your job," Marcus began, his voice measured, "is to serve and protect. But tell me, officer, at what point did I become a threat to either you or this community?" The question wasn't aggressive. It was thoughtful, calculated, and delivered with a sincerity that pierced through the layers of Hayes's bravado. For a moment, Hayes seemed to wrestle with his own thoughts. Perhaps he was recalling the countless other stops where his behavior had gone unchecked. Or maybe he was considering what might have happened if Marcus hadn't been the man. He was a man who knew his rights and how to assert them without escalating the situation. Whatever the case, Hayes didn't respond. Instead, he shifted uncomfortably, his hand lingering near his belt as if seeking the comfort of a routine he could no longer justify. Marcus saw the opportunity to steer the conversation towards something constructive. "Officer Hayes," he continued, his tone firm but not unkind, "I've spent years working to ensure that encounters like this don't define the relationship between law enforcement and the communities they serve. But here we are, and I can't help but wonder how many others have stood where I'm standing now, feeling powerless under the weight of suspicion." Hayes's silence was telling. Marcus wasn't looking for an apology, nor did he expect one. What he sought was acknowledgement, a moment of clarity where Hayes might see beyond the uniform and the badge to the humanity of the people he encountered daily. "You had questions," Marcus said, gesturing lightly toward the patrol car. "Now I have one for you. Why did you pull me over today? Was it truly about a taillight, or was there something else?" The deputy's gaze faltered, and Marcus saw the flicker of doubt in his eyes. It wasn't just about the taillight, and they both knew it. But admitting as much would mean confronting biases that Hayes perhaps wasn't ready to face. Still, the weight of Marcus's calm scrutiny left little room for evasion. "It was just protocol," Hayes muttered, though his words lacked conviction. Marcus nodded slowly, as if weighing the response. "Protocol," he repeated, letting the word linger. "An interesting choice of terms. Tell me, officer, is it protocol to question a citizen about their destination during a routine stop, or to conduct a pat-down without reasonable suspicion?" His questions were pointed but delivered without malice. Marcus wasn't trying to humiliate Hayes. He was offering him a chance to reflect, to understand the implications of his actions. The tension between them began to shift. Hayes, who had started the encounter in a position of power, now found himself on the defensive. And yet, Marcus's demeanor didn't change. He remained composed, his voice steady, his posture unwavering. It was this poise under pressure that made Hayes begin to see Marcus not as an adversary, but as a man of principle. "You're right," Hayes said finally, his voice barely audible. "I shouldn't have assumed." He trailed off, struggling to articulate what he was beginning to realize. Marcus offered him a faint smile, one that held neither triumph nor pity, but rather a quiet encouragement. "Awareness is the first step," Marcus said, his tone gentle. "But it's what you do with that awareness that truly matters." The conversation might have ended there, but fate had other plans. As the two men stood by the roadside, the sound of a car door closing drew their attention. A bystander, unnoticed until now, had been recording the interaction from her parked vehicle. She approached cautiously, holding her phone as if it were a shield. "Excuse me," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "but I think people need to see this." Marcus turned to her, his expression softening. "Ma'am, I appreciate your concern," he said, "but this is a matter that needs to be addressed through the proper channels." The woman hesitated, her eyes darting between Marcus and Hayes. "With all due respect," she said, "this is bigger than just the two of you. People need to know that someone like you is out here, standing up for what's right." Her words carried an undeniable truth. Marcus understood the power of public accountability, but he also recognized the dangers of rushing to judgment. "If you choose to share this," he said carefully, "I only ask that you do so with the intention of fostering understanding, not division." The woman nodded, clearly moved by his words. As she stepped back, Marcus turned his attention back to Hayes. "This isn't the end," he said, his voice resolute. "Not for me and not for you. What happens next will depend on how we both choose to move forward." Hayes nodded slowly, his expression a mixture of regret and resolve. The encounter ended without further incident, but its impact was far-reaching. Marcus returned to his car, his thoughts heavy with the knowledge that this was just one moment in a larger struggle. As he drove away, he couldn't help but wonder how many others would have the strength to stand firm in the face of such challenges. The recording, as Marcus suspected, found its way online. It sparked a wave of discussion, not just about the events of that day, but about the broader issues of bias, accountability, and the power dynamics inherent in policing. Marcus's calm and measured response became a beacon of hope, a reminder that change begins with a single act of courage. What steps will Marcus take to ensure this encounter becomes a catalyst for meaningful reform? And how will the public's reaction shape the future of law enforcement in Willow Creek? Join us next time as we delve deeper into the unfolding story of resilience, accountability, and the pursuit of justice. The days following the encounter on County Road 21 unfolded like ripples in a pond, each moment carrying the weight of what had transpired. The video, recorded by the bystander and shared on social media, gained momentum faster than anyone could have anticipated. By the time Marcus Ellis walked into his office 3 days later, his name was on the lips of journalists, community leaders, and everyday citizens across the state. The footage had sparked a fierce public debate. Some praised Marcus's composure and integrity, calling him a symbol of justice in a time of deep division. Others, particularly those within the law enforcement community, questioned his approach, seeing it as a public humiliation for an officer simply doing his job. The clash of perspectives was both unavoidable and necessary, Marcus thought, as he prepared for what would undoubtedly be a challenging day. As Director of Police Oversight, Marcus was no stranger to difficult conversations. His role required him to navigate the delicate balance between holding officers accountable and supporting them in their mission to serve the public. But this time, the stakes felt different. This time, the incident involved him directly, and the spotlight was brighter than ever. Sitting at his desk, Marcus reviewed the official report filed by Deputy Hayes. It was a mix of truth and omission, carefully worded to downplay the intensity of their encounter. Routine stop, it read. Minor traffic infraction. Citizen compliant but resistant to questioning. Marcus couldn't help but shake his head. The language was sanitized, devoid of the nuance and tension that had defined their interaction. But he knew this wasn't unique to Hayes. It was a systemic issue, a way of framing events to protect the institution at the expense of transparency. Later that morning, Marcus received a call from the governor's office. The governor, a pragmatic yet empathetic leader named Evelyn Hart, had always been a staunch supporter of Marcus's work. But now, her tone carried an urgency Marcus had rarely heard. "Marcus," she began, "I've seen the video. It's compelling, to say the least, but it's also dividing people, and we need to address this head-on." Marcus leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. "Governor, you know I've always been committed to reform. This is an opportunity to bring systemic issues to light, but we have to do it thoughtfully." Evelyn sighed. "Agreed. That's why I'm asking you to lead this effort personally. I want you to present a plan to the state legislature, a comprehensive strategy to address the very problems that led to this incident. Can I count on you?" The weight of her words settled over Marcus like a heavy cloak. This wasn't just about his encounter with Hayes. It was about transforming a flawed system from the ground up. "You can count on me," he said firmly. As the day wore on, Marcus found himself reflecting on the pivotal moment during the traffic stop, the moment he had revealed his identity to Hayes. It wasn't a move born of pride or a desire to assert dominance. It was, in his mind, an act of necessity, a way to redirect the power dynamic without resorting to confrontation. He recalled the look on Hayes's face when he had uttered those simple words. "I'm Marcus Ellis, Director of Police Oversight for the state." It was a moment of reckoning, not just for Hayes, but for everything he represented. A culture of authority that too often operated without question. But Marcus also knew that his revelation had been about more than just titles. It was a reminder that positions of power come with responsibilities, not privileges. Hayes had been forced to confront his actions in a way that many officers never are. And in doing so, he had provided Marcus with an opportunity to lead by example. Power, Marcus mused aloud as he sat in his office that evening, isn't about control. It's about accountability. The thought brought him a measure of clarity as he began drafting the outline of the plan he would present to the legislature. The plan, as Marcus envisioned it, would be ambitious but achievable. It would include mandatory bias training for all law enforcement officers, increased transparency in reporting incidents, and the establishment of an independent review board to oversee cases of misconduct. But beyond the policies and procedures, Marcus wanted the plan to emphasize one core principle: empathy. "We can't legislate empathy," he admitted to his team during a late-night meeting. "But we can create a culture that values it, that sees it as a strength rather than a weakness." As the team worked tirelessly over the next few days, news of Marcus's efforts began to spread. The public, inspired by his calm yet decisive handling of the traffic stop, rallied behind him. Community organizations, civil rights leaders, and even some law enforcement officials voiced their support for his vision. But not everyone was on board. Critics accused Marcus of using the incident to further his own agenda, while others dismissed his plans as unrealistic or overly idealistic. One evening, as Marcus prepared to leave the office, he received an unexpected visitor. It was Deputy Hayes. The young officer stood in the doorway, his expression a mixture of apprehension and determination. "Mr. Ellis," Hayes began, "I wanted to thank you." Marcus tilted his head, surprised. "Thank me?" Hayes nodded. "For not escalating things that day. For giving me a chance to see where I went wrong. I've been doing a lot of thinking since then, and I realize now that I've been carrying biases I didn't even recognize." Marcus gestured for Hayes to sit. "Acknowledgement is the first step," he said, echoing his words from the roadside encounter. "But what matters is what you do next. Are you ready to commit to change? Hayes nodded earnestly, his demeanor a stark contrast to the man Marcus had encountered days earlier. I want to do better, he said. Not just for myself, but for the community I serve. The conversation with Hayes left Marcus with a renewed sense of purpose. It was proof that change was possible, even in the hearts of those who seemed most resistant. But it also underscored the importance of addressing these issues at a systemic level. Individual growth was meaningful, but it needed to be supported by a structure that encouraged and rewarded ethical behavior. What strategies will Marcus propose to bring meaningful reform to the state's policing system? And how will these ideas be received by the public and lawmakers alike? As his efforts gain momentum, Marcus will face both unexpected allies and formidable challenges. Join us next time to explore how one man's commitment to integrity sparks a movement for justice and accountability. Marcus Ellis sat at his desk, the glow of his computer screen illuminating his thoughtful expression as he reviewed the final draft of the reform proposal. The document was a culmination of years of experience, recent reflections, and the input of trusted colleagues. It outlined a multifaceted approach to reshaping law enforcement practices in the state: mandatory bias training, increased oversight through independent review boards, and enhanced transparency in reporting police conduct. But as thorough as the proposal was, Marcus knew that its success would hinge on more than just policy. It required a shift in culture and a deep, collective commitment to accountability. The stakes became even clearer when Marcus arrived at the state legislature to present his plan. The committee room was filled to capacity, with members of the press, community leaders, and concerned citizens packed shoulder to shoulder. The air was charged with anticipation, a mixture of hope and skepticism. As Marcus walked to the podium, he felt the weight of their expectations pressing down on him. He took a deep breath and began. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice steady, "the events of the past week have brought into sharp focus an issue that has long simmered beneath the surface. Today, we have a unique opportunity, not just to address an incident, but to lay the groundwork for a better, fairer future." Marcus started by recounting the traffic stop, not as an isolated event, but as a symptom of a larger problem. He described the sense of unease that had settled over him during the encounter and the realization that his experience, though unsettling, was far from unique. "How many others," he asked, his gaze sweeping the room, "have faced similar moments of doubt and fear, unable to assert their rights because they lack the knowledge or the platform to do so?" The question hung in the air, resonating with those who had lived through their own encounters with unchecked authority. The heart of Marcus's proposal was the creation of an independent review board, a diverse panel of community members, legal experts, and law enforcement representatives tasked with investigating complaints against officers. "This board will not operate as an adversary to law enforcement," Marcus emphasized. "Rather, it will serve as a bridge, fostering trust by ensuring that all parties are heard and that justice is served impartially." He then outlined the importance of mandatory bias training, not as a punitive measure, but as a tool for growth. "We all carry biases," he said. "The key is to recognize them and learn how to prevent them from influencing our actions." As Marcus spoke, the room seemed to shift. The initial skepticism began to give way to thoughtful nods and murmurs of agreement. Even some of the legislators who had entered the room with folded arms and guarded expressions now leaned forward. Their interest piqued, but Marcus wasn't naive. He knew that winning over the public was only part of the battle. To enact real change, he needed the support of law enforcement, a group that had long viewed oversight as a threat rather than an ally. This reality became evident during the Q&A session when a senior police officer stood to speak. Chief Ronald Blake, a grizzled veteran with decades of service under his belt, approached the microphone with a measured stride. "Mr. Ellis," he began, his deep voice commanding attention, "your proposal is ambitious, no doubt. But tell me, how do you intend to balance accountability with the morale of the officers who put their lives on the line every day?" It was a fair question, and Marcus appreciated the sincerity behind it. "Chief Blake," he replied, "I understand the challenges officers face. My late father was an officer. And he taught me the value of their work and the sacrifices they make. But he also taught me that accountability is not the enemy of good policing, it's its foundation. When officers know they are supported, but also held to the highest standards, trust flourishes not just between them and the public, but within the ranks as well. The room fell silent as Marcus's words sank in. Chief Blake nodded thoughtfully before returning to his seat. It wasn't a victory, not yet, but it was a step in the right direction. After the session, Marcus was approached by several community leaders who expressed their support for his vision. Among them was Ruth Caldwell, a retired teacher who had long been an advocate for social justice. "You're doing good work, Mr. Ellis," she said, her voice warm but firm. "But remember, this is just the beginning. Real change takes time and persistence." Ruth's words stayed with Marcus as he left the legislature that evening. She was right. The proposal was just a blueprint. The real work would come in the weeks and months ahead as he navigated the labyrinth of politics, public opinion, and institutional resistance. But Marcus was undeterred. He believed in the power of persistence and the necessity of incremental progress. Back in Willow Creek, the ripple effects of the traffic stop continued to unfold. Deputy Hayes, inspired by his conversation with Marcus, began attending community meetings to listen to the concerns of residents. His presence wasn't always welcomed. Some viewed it as a performative gesture. But over time, his sincerity began to shine through. Hayes even volunteered to participate in a pilot program for the proposed bias training, becoming one of its earliest advocates. Meanwhile, Marcus worked tirelessly to build coalitions, reaching out to stakeholders from all sides. He met with police unions, civic organizations, and lawmakers, each conversation a delicate dance of persuasion and compromise. He knew the road ahead would be long, but he also knew it was worth traveling. What unexpected alliances and challenges will Marcus encounter as he pushes for systemic reform? And how will the community of Willow Creek rally or resist the changes that are on the horizon? Stay tuned as the story deepens, revealing the intricate balance of power, perseverance, and the human spirit in the fight for justice. Weeks turned into months, and the ripples from Marcus Ellis's encounter with Deputy Hayes had grown into waves of reformative energy sweeping through Willow Creek and beyond. The video of their interaction continued to circulate, becoming a symbol for both the complexities of law enforcement and the pressing need for systemic accountability. Public forums filled with impassioned debates. Marcus's name was invoked in town halls, newsrooms, and family dinner tables alike. For every supporter who saw him as a beacon of integrity, there were critics who accused him of painting law enforcement with too broad a brush. Yet, amidst the noise, Marcus remained steadfast, knowing that the path to progress was rarely smooth. The reform proposal Marcus had championed began to gain traction. State lawmakers, spurred by mounting public pressure and the undeniable clarity of Marcus's arguments, moved to schedule hearings to discuss the measures. For Marcus, this was a milestone, but it was far from the finish line. Each hearing brought its own set of challenges, as lawmakers questioned not only the feasibility of his ideas, but also their implications for budgets and political capital. Marcus, however, was undeterred. His arguments were rooted in data, compassion, and the unwavering belief that ethical reform was both a moral and practical necessity. One pivotal moment came during a public hearing where Marcus faced a panel of legislators and law enforcement representatives. Among them was Senator Carolyn Stokes, a staunch advocate for police unions and a vocal critic of what she called overreach by oversight bodies. Her questions were sharp, her tone pointed. "Mr. Ellis," she began, her voice carrying the weight of authority, "you propose a level of oversight that some would argue undermines the autonomy of law enforcement agencies. How do you respond to those who believe your measures will handcuff our officers in critical moments?" Marcus's reply was measured, his tone calm yet firm. "Senator Stokes, I understand the concern, but accountability does not hinder effectiveness, it enhances it. Studies consistently show that trust between law enforcement and the communities they serve directly correlates with public safety outcomes. When officers are empowered by clear, fair standards and a culture of transparency, they can perform their duties more effectively with the confidence that they have the community's support. The room buzzed with quiet murmurs. It was a delicate argument, but one that resonated with those willing to look beyond immediate fears to the broader benefits of reform. Senator Stokes leaned back in her chair, her expression unreadable, but she asked no further questions. Marcus took it as a small victory and pressed forward, outlining the details of the independent review board, the structured bias training programs, and the mechanisms for increased transparency in reporting misconduct. Outside the legislative chambers, Marcus worked tirelessly to build alliances. One of the most surprising came from an unlikely source, Officer Darren Collins, a veteran of the Willow Creek Sheriff's Department who had initially been critical of Marcus's efforts. Officer Collins had been a mentor to Deputy Hayes and had taken Marcus's critique of the system personally. But after watching the video of the encounter, multiple times and attending a community forum where Marcus spoke about the shared humanity between officers and citizens, Collins's perspective began to shift. "Mr. Ellis," Collins said one evening as he approached Marcus after a town hall meeting, "I have to admit, I wasn't on board with your ideas at first. I thought you were just another outsider trying to tell us how to do our jobs. But after hearing you speak, I realized you're not against us, you're with us. You want us to be better, not just for the community, but for ourselves." Marcus extended his hand, his gratitude evident. "Officer Collins, that means more to me than you know. Change starts with conversations like this. It's not about choosing sides. It's about working together to build something stronger." The alliance with Collins proved instrumental. Through his network within the Sheriff's Department, Collins began facilitating informal discussions among his peers, encouraging them to view the proposed reforms not as a threat, but as an opportunity. He shared his own journey of understanding, recounting how his initial defensiveness had given way to introspection and a genuine desire to improve. Slowly but surely, the resistance within the department began to soften, replaced by a cautious curiosity about what Marcus's vision could achieve. Meanwhile, the Independent Review Board, a cornerstone of Marcus's proposal, began to take shape. Marcus was deliberate in assembling a diverse group of individuals to lead the initiative. Among them were legal experts, community advocates, and even a few retired law enforcement officers. One member in particular stood out, Dr. Angela Ramirez, a criminologist with decades of experience studying police-community relations. Dr. Ramirez's insights brought a level of rigor and credibility to the board's efforts, and her calm demeanor made her a natural bridge between the often oppositional forces of law enforcement and public advocacy. As the board began its work, it quickly became evident just how deeply entrenched some of the systemic issues were. Complaints that had long been dismissed or ignored were now being reviewed with a level of scrutiny that many officers found uncomfortable but necessary. Patterns emerged: certain officers with repeated infractions, precincts with disproportionately high complaint rates, all pointing to the urgent need for structural change. Marcus knew these revelations would be controversial, but he also understood their power. "We can't fix what we don't acknowledge," he reminded his team during a particularly heated meeting. Transparency is the foundation of accountability. Public reaction to the board's early findings was mixed. Some hailed the transparency as a long overdue step toward justice, while others accused Marcus of vilifying law enforcement. Marcus met these criticisms head-on, often appearing at community forums to address concerns directly. He shared his belief that accountability was not a punishment, but a tool for growth, one that could ultimately elevate the profession of policing to a higher standard. In the midst of this progress, Marcus received an unexpected invitation. The governor wanted him to deliver a keynote address at a statewide summit on public safety and community trust. The event would be attended by leaders from across the political spectrum, as well as law enforcement officials, activists, and citizens. Marcus knew this was his chance to galvanize support for the reforms, to bring together disparate voices under a common vision for a better future. As he prepared his speech, Marcus reflected on the journey that had brought him to this point. What had started as a routine traffic stop had evolved into a movement, one rooted in the belief that integrity, Empathy and perseverance could overcome even the most entrenched challenges. He thought of the people who had joined him along the way: Ruth Caldwell, Officer Collins, Dr. Ramirez, and countless others who had lent their voices to the cause. And he thought of Deputy Hayes, whose initial missteps had sparked this transformation and who now stood as a testament to the power of personal growth. How will Marcus's message at the summit resonate with leaders and citizens alike? Will his efforts to unite opposing perspectives succeed, or will the divisions prove too deep to bridge? As the movement reaches a pivotal moment, the stakes are higher than ever. Stay with us as the story continues to unfold, revealing the triumphs and trials of a journey toward justice and renewal. The summit was held in the grand auditorium of the state capitol, its arched ceilings and ornate columns lending a sense of gravity to the event. The room was packed with an eclectic mix of attendees: state officials, law enforcement representatives, community leaders, activists, and journalists, all waiting to hear Marcus Ellis's keynote address. As Marcus took the stage, a wave of murmurs rippled through the crowd. For many, he had become a symbol of hope and change. For others, he represented disruption and unwelcome scrutiny. Yet, as he stood before them, Marcus exuded the calm confidence that had defined his approach from the beginning. He scanned the audience, his eyes briefly locking with familiar faces. Ruth Caldwell offered an encouraging nod. Officer Darren Collins sat beside his colleagues, and even Deputy Hayes had managed to secure a spot at the back of the room. "Good morning," Marcus began, his voice steady and deliberate. "We are gathered here today because we share a common goal: a safer, fairer, and more just society. But achieving that goal requires us to confront uncomfortable truths, to recognize that the systems we have relied upon, while built with the best intentions, are not infallible. And it requires us to do something even harder: to look within ourselves and ask how we can do better." The audience listened intently as Marcus recounted the events of the past months. He described the traffic stop with Deputy Hayes not as an isolated incident, but as a microcosm of the broader challenges facing law enforcement and the communities they serve. He spoke of his efforts to build bridges between these groups, to foster understanding and accountability in equal measure. "Accountability is not an indictment of character," he said, his voice resonating through the hall. "It is a commitment to integrity. It is the foundation upon which trust is built, and without trust, we cannot move forward." Marcus detailed the progress of the Independent Review Board, highlighting its findings and the steps being taken to address systemic issues. He shared stories of officers like Darren Collins, who had embraced the opportunity to grow, and community members who had found renewed faith in the justice system. "This work is not easy," he admitted, his tone frank. "It requires patience, humility, and an unwavering belief in the possibility of change. But I stand before you today as proof that change is possible." As Marcus concluded his speech, the room erupted into applause. The reception wasn't unanimous. Pockets of the audience remained stoic, but it was clear that his words had struck a chord. The governor took the stage next, thanking Marcus for his leadership and reiterating her commitment to supporting the proposed reforms. Yet, amidst the optimism, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that the road ahead would still be fraught with challenges. It was later that evening, as Marcus was packing up his notes in the quiet solitude of his office, that the unexpected ally emerged. A knock at the door startled him, and when he looked up, he saw a young man standing hesitantly in the doorway. The man was holding a small digital camera and wore a nervous expression. "Mr. Ellis," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, I need to talk to you." Marcus gestured for the man to come in. "What can I do for you?" he asked, intrigued but cautious. The man introduced himself as Jamal Torres, a freelance videographer who had been passing through Willow Creek the day of Marcus's traffic stop. "I was there that day," Jamal explained, his hands fidgeting with the camera strap. "I saw what happened, and I recorded it. I didn't post it online like the other video. I didn't want to stir things up without understanding the full picture. But after hearing your speech today, I think you need to see this." Jamal handed Marcus the camera, and together they watched the footage. It captured the moments leading up to and during the traffic stop, but from a different angle than the video that had gone viral. This footage was clearer, showing not only Marcus's composure, but also Hayes' body language, his initial aggression. The subtle shift when Marcus revealed his identity, and the gradual softening as the encounter unfolded. More importantly, it captured details that the first video had missed. The reactions of passers-by, the tension in Marcus's voice as he asserted his rights, and the measured way he de-escalated the situation. "This is powerful," Marcus said, his voice heavy with emotion. "It tells the story in a way that words alone cannot." Jamal nodded. "I thought so too. That's why I want you to have it. Use it however you think will help the most." The next day, Marcus shared the footage with his team and the independent review board. After careful consideration, they decided to release it alongside a statement about the ongoing reforms and the importance of constructive dialogue. The new video quickly gained traction, adding depth and nuance to the public's understanding of the events and further solidifying Marcus's role as a catalyst for change. Perhaps most surprising was the effect the video had on Deputy Hayes, watching himself from an outsider's perspective, forced him to confront the biases and assumptions that had shaped his actions that day. It wasn't an easy process, but it was transformative. Hayes requested to speak at the next community forum, where he publicly apologized for his behavior and pledged to support the reform efforts. His words were met with a mix of skepticism and appreciation. But for Marcus, it was another sign that progress, while slow, was possible. As the reform movement gained momentum, Marcus found himself reflecting on Jamal's role in the story. The young videographer's decision to remain in the background until the right moment had been a quiet act of courage, one that underscored the power of unseen allies in the fight for justice. It was a reminder that change often comes not from grand gestures, but from the collective efforts of individuals willing to stand for what is right. What role will the new footage play in shaping the public's perception of the reform movement? And how will Marcus navigate the growing pressure from both supporters and detractors as the stakes continue to rise? Stay tuned as the journey unfolds, revealing the intricate interplay of courage, collaboration, and resilience in the pursuit of lasting change. The release of Jamal Torz's footage sparked a new wave of discussions across media platforms and community spaces. The video painted an even fuller picture of what had transpired that day on County Road 21, showcasing not just Marcus's composed leadership, but also the stark realities of bias and the potential for redemption. It ignited conversations about the need for reform in policing and the importance of empathy in moments of conflict. Most notably, the video did something unexpected. It brought voices from all corners of the community into the conversation. Comments flooded the State Oversight Board's website and social media platforms. Many citizens shared their own stories of interactions with law enforcement, recounting experiences that ranged from encouraging to troubling. One post read, "Seeing Marcus Ellis stand tall and calm in that moment gives me hope. My son was stopped unfairly just last month, and watching this inspires me to believe things can change." Another commenter wrote, "I'm a retired officer, and I see so much of my younger self in Deputy Hayes. It's not easy to confront your mistakes, but it's necessary. Marcus is showing us all how to lead with dignity." Marcus spent hours reading these messages, moved by the raw honesty and collective yearning for change. What struck him most were the stories from residents of Willow Creek, individuals who had lived with the consequences of systemic issues for years. At the next community forum, Marcus invited several of these individuals to speak, giving them the platform to share their experiences publicly. Their testimonies were powerful and heartbreaking, highlighting both the need for reform and the resilience of a community determined to heal. One of the speakers was Angela Carter, a local teacher who recounted an incident where her brother had been profiled and detained without cause. "When it happened, I felt powerless," Angela said, her voice trembling with emotion. But watching Marcus confront Deputy Hayes with such grace and resolve showed me that power doesn't come from aggression. It comes from standing firm in your truth. That's what this movement is giving us. A voice, a chance to be heard. As the forum continued, Marcus noticed a shift in the room. People who had once been divided by mistrust and fear were beginning to find common ground. Even some of the law enforcement officers in attendance, initially hesitant to engage, began to participate in the discussions. Officer Darren Collins shared his perspective, recounting his own journey of understanding and growth. "I used to think accountability was a threat," he admitted, "but now I see it as an opportunity to do better, to be better, for the people we serve and for ourselves." His words were met with applause, a sign of the growing unity within the community. The momentum from these forums began to spread beyond Willow Creek. Media outlets picked up the story, framing it as a case study in how communities and law enforcement could come together to address systemic issues. Marcus found himself fielding requests for interviews and speaking engagements, each one an opportunity to amplify the voices of the people he represented. "This isn't about me," he would often say. "It's about all of us, every individual who has experienced injustice and every officer who wants to be part of the solution." Change begins when we listen to one another. Amidst the growing support, there were still those who opposed the reforms. Some critics accused Marcus of pandering to public opinion, while others claimed the new policies would tie the hands of law enforcement. These detractors found a platform in certain media outlets, framing the movement as a challenge to authority rather than an effort to strengthen it. Marcus faced these criticisms head-on, engaging in debates with patience and clarity. "Accountability is not anti-police," he argued during one televised interview. "It's pro-community. It's about building a foundation of trust that benefits everyone." The most surprising development came when Deputy Hayes himself requested to join Marcus at a forum in Willow Creek. Hayes had undergone a significant transformation, participating in the pilot bias training program and seeking guidance from mentors like Officer Collins. Standing before a packed audience, Hayes spoke with humility and sincerity. "I made mistakes that day," he said. "I let my biases cloud my judgment, and I'm not proud of that. But thanks to Mr. Ellis and the people who believed in the possibility of change, I've had the chance to reflect and grow. I'm committed to doing better, not just as an officer, but as a person." Hayes' speech was met with mixed reactions. While many applauded his honesty, others remained skeptical, unwilling to forgive so easily. Marcus understood their reservations. "Redemption isn't about erasing the past," he said, addressing the audience. "It's about learning from it and using those lessons to create a better future. That's what we're here to do together." As the weeks passed, the community began to rally around a shared vision for the future. Local leaders organized workshops and town halls, fostering dialogue between residents and law enforcement. The Independent Review Board issued its first comprehensive report, outlining key findings and recommendations for reform. Among these was a plan to expand the bias training program statewide and establish community liaison officers to improve communication and trust. Through it all, Marcus remained a steady presence, balancing his role as a leader with his commitment to amplifying the voices of those most affected by systemic issues. He often thought of Jamal Torres, whose quiet decision to share his footage had catalyzed so much of the progress they were now seeing. "Change doesn't always start with a shout," Marcus reflected during one meeting. "Sometimes it starts with a whisper and the courage to act on it." How will the growing unity in Willow Creek influence the broader push for reform across the state? And what new challenges will emerge as the movement gains national attention? Join us next time as the story deepens, revealing the resilience and resolve required to turn a moment of reckoning into a lasting legacy of justice and equity. The reform efforts born out of Marcus Ellis's stand had begun to reshape the fabric of Willow Creek, but the true test lay in sustaining this momentum and spreading it across the state. By now, the town had become a microcosm of the national conversation about justice and accountability. Community workshops were thriving, bridging the gap between law enforcement and the residents they served. Stories of transformation, both individual and systemic, began to emerge as powerful symbols of what was possible when people worked together toward a common goal. Yet, Marcus knew the journey was far from over. Change was fragile, and complacency was its greatest enemy. One of the most transformative elements of the reforms was the statewide expansion of the Independent Review Board initiative. With backing from the governor and the legislature, Marcus oversaw the implementation of similar boards in counties across the state. These boards were tasked with investigating complaints against law enforcement officers, offering recommendations for discipline when necessary, and providing a transparent mechanism for accountability. The process wasn't without its challenges. Some jurisdictions resisted the idea, claiming it undermined local authority. But Marcus and his team responded with patience and persistence, emphasizing the value of consistency and fairness in restoring public trust. A pivotal moment came when the first statewide review board report was published. The findings were eye-opening. While many officers adhered to high standards of professionalism, there were undeniable patterns of misconduct in certain departments. These ranged from excessive use of force to a lack of adherence to procedural guidelines. The report didn't just outline the problems. It offered detailed recommendations, including additional training programs, stricter oversight protocols, and avenues for community input. For Marcus, this was the culmination of months of tireless work, but also the beginning of a new chapter. The findings would now need to be implemented, a process that required collaboration, resources, and unwavering commitment. At the same time, Marcus found himself increasingly in the national spotlight. News outlets from across the country began covering the reforms in Willow Creek as a model for other communities. Grappling with similar issues, Marcus was invited to speak at conferences, universities, and law enforcement summits, where he shared the lessons learned from his journey. "Real change starts with humility," he often said. "It requires us to acknowledge our flaws, embrace uncomfortable truths, and commit to doing better, not just in theory, but in practice." His speeches resonated with audiences, sparking discussions about how to replicate the success of Willow Creek on a broader scale. Amid the growing momentum, Marcus faced a new set of challenges. Critics began to argue that the reforms were spreading too quickly, without enough consideration for local nuances. Some claimed that the statewide review boards were overstepping their bounds, creating friction between communities and their police departments. Marcus took these criticisms seriously, meeting with local leaders to address their concerns. "Reform isn't about imposing solutions," he told one group of sheriffs during a contentious meeting. "It's about building partnerships and finding what works for each community, while staying true to the principles of accountability and fairness." Back in Willow Creek, the effects of the reforms were becoming increasingly visible. The bias training program, which had initially been met with skepticism, was now a cornerstone of the department's culture. Officers like Darren Collins and even Deputy Hayes had become vocal advocates for the training, sharing their personal experiences of growth and reflection. Collins, who had once been wary of Marcus's vision, now spoke at community events about the importance of empathy and self-awareness in policing. "I used to think I knew it all," he admitted during one forum. "But this process has taught me that learning never stops, especially when it comes to understanding the people we serve." Deputy Hayes' transformation was even more remarkable. After completing the pilot bias training program, he requested to become a mentor for new recruits, guiding them through the challenges of policing in a way that emphasized integrity and respect. "I want to help the next generation avoid the mistakes I made," Hayes said during a departmental meeting. His sincerity earned him respect, even from those who had initially doubted his commitment to change. The community's response to these efforts was overwhelmingly positive. Residents who had once viewed the sheriff's department with suspicion now began to see it as a partner in creating a safer, more equitable town. Initiatives like ride-alongs, town hall meetings, and open-door policies further strengthened the bond between law enforcement and the people they served. Marcus often reflected on these moments as proof of what could be achieved when individuals chose to believe in each other's potential for growth and redemption. One of the most poignant moments came during a ceremony held at the Willow Creek Community Center. The event was organized to honor the individuals who had played pivotal roles in the town's transformation. Among those recognized were Ruth Caldwell, Officer Collins, Deputy Hayes, and even Jamal Torres, whose decision to share his footage had been the catalyst for so much of the progress. As Marcus presented each honoree with a plaque, he spoke of their courage and the lessons they had taught him. "Change doesn't happen in a vacuum," he said. "It takes people willing to step forward, to risk vulnerability, and to believe in the possibility of something better. That's what each of you has done, and for that, I am deeply grateful." As the ceremony concluded, Marcus found himself standing alone on the community center's porch, gazing out at the town that had become a symbol of hope. The journey had been arduous, filled with moments of doubt and setbacks, but it had also been profoundly rewarding. He knew there was still work to be done, not just in Willow Creek, but across the state and beyond. Yet, he also knew that the seeds of change had been planted, and with continued effort, they would grow into something enduring. This story reminds us that the path to justice and integrity is never easy, but it's always worth pursuing. If Marcus's journey inspired you, consider subscribing to this channel to stay connected with more stories of resilience and change. Share your thoughts in the comments below. What does accountability mean to you? And how can we all contribute to a better future? Let's keep this conversation alive and work together to create the world we want to see.